Animation is a messy business. Keyframes get jumbled, gimbals get locked, and Bezier handles kick in your teeth. But luckily for you, Blender has a fantastic set of tools that can help to manage object relationships and even automate some otherwise complex maneuvers. So today I'll be showing you a few of the constraints that Blender has to offer, demonstrating them in context and giving you a little bit of practical application of their uses. Constraints give you the power to rig objects really easily with the click of a few buttons. Different constraints offer control over specific attributes. This can really aid you in setting up more complex movements or more dynamic rigs. In my short, you see a very sexy pseudo-product animation of a bow. And then you see it eviscerate a stupid duck. That's not really a part of what we're doing today. We'll be using that same bow to demonstrate hooks, child of, follow path, and damped tracking constraints. Be sure to download that bow from Gumroad so that you can follow along. The link will be in the description. Even though we're only really looking at these constraints in a demonstrative context today, all these tools are so useful for everything from prop animation to even actual product viz animation. Now, the first constraint that we're going to look at today is not really a constraint, so that's my bad. But it is still phenomenally helpful and actually works more like a constraint than what it actually is, which is a modifier. That non-constraint constraint is called a hook. Now, a hook is essentially just a modifier that grants you the power to assign vertices to an empty object, allowing you to control their transformations. I'm sure you can think of so many great ways to employ this type of a tool: smears, mesh manipulation, maybe even some simple character animation. So let's hop into Blender and I'll show you how to hook that up. So here in Blender, if you downloaded and opened the project file, you'll see a bow with a nice little rig here. We'll get to the rig eventually, and we'll take a look at how this rig interacts. But for now, we can just actually turn it off so that it's not visual overload here. So let's go up to bow_rig in the collections in the top right of the outliner, and we can just toggle that off with that little check mark. So now we have a clean bow, and what we want to do is actually animate this bowstring or rig it up so that we can animate it. And we want to be able to move this bowstring with a controller of some kind. Now, this bowstring is actually made with a curve. If you go down here to the data properties panel, you can see that we have a depth value right here under the roundness of the bevel. And that just means that this works as a curve, and I can move any one of these points and it maintains the volume of its mesh. So it's not an actual mesh object, and this actually helps us in this case because all we have to do is pull back a single point and it will pull back the bowstring, which is perfect. So we're going to use, as I said previously, we're going to use a hook, and the hook is actually a modifier. So let's go up here to modifiers. It'll be the little blue wrench. And we can just add modifier, and we're going to look up a hook. Now, there are essentially three ways to add a hook to an object, and we're going to do all three of them just to kind of show you exactly how you would do it. And there's actually more ways to add a hook, but there's three main ways, I guess. And the first and most annoying and kind of pointless way to do it is the way that we're doing it right here, to add a hook modifier from the modifier panel, just like that. So I'm going to tab to go back into object mode. And with the hook modifier here, you can see that we have a couple parameters, but the top one right here is object. So we need to actually give our bowstring here something to hook onto. So I'm going to hit tab to go back into edit mode right here. I should have done this already. I'm going to hold down Shift and S and put cursor to selected. So that will just take our little 3D cursor there, and it will put it right where the bowstring point is, where we want to control it. So with our cursor right here, now I can add in with Shift A a new empty, and I'll just choose a cube, and you can't see it. The world scale is totally messed up. That's on me. So when you download this, you're actually operating with a teeny tiny bow, and that's because it was teeny tiny for the shot I was doing in my shorts. So apologies there, but it is what it is. So I'll scale this down to something that feels appropriate like that, and now I can hit Command A and apply the scale. So now we have our controller here, and if we click our bow string again, we can go back to our hook modifier, and we can just choose this empty as our controller. Let's go ahead and rename this to string center, just like that. Okay, and so now if we move this around, nothing happens, and we have to set up a few more things. So we did add the hook modifier to the string, and we added an object target, which would be our string controller here, but we didn't specify what points need to be assigned to this. So if we tab into edit mode, we can see that we now have quite a few more parameters here than we did previously in object mode. And so with this point selected, we can just click assign like that and tab back into edit mode. If I move our controller around now, you can see that we do indeed have a hook that moves the bowstring, which is really, really great. However, we also need to constrain the top and the bottom of the string so that it orients itself to the arms of the bow when the bow is moved itself. So to hook the top and bottom, I'm actually going to demonstrate the other two ways to do this. So with this selected, we're going to tab into edit mode, and this is actually the easiest way. It's the cut and dry, super simple, hacky way. We're just going to hit Control H and hook to new object, and bam, we have a hook on that object. If we grab the hook right here, we can move it around, and we see that it does indeed work. It is massive. Again, my bad, that's world space problem. But we can go to our object properties panel. It'll look like the little axis there, and we can change the size. So I'm just going to scale this down as far as it'll go, and I'm going to change this from a plane axis to a sphere like that. So now I have full control over that, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the sphere right here, and I can go up to my side panel. If you don't have this open, you can toggle that open within, and I'm going to change this from a negative 0.29 to a positive 0.29 for this one. So now I have a controller up here as well, but if I try to move it around, it does not control the bowstring at all. So that's actually where our third method comes in here. Let's go ahead and grab our bowstring. I'll tab into edit mode like this, and I can grab this top vertice. And now holding control, I'm just going to click our other empty up here in the outliner. And you can do it in the viewport here, but I found that sometimes it's a little bit finicky and you have to click a bunch of times, so whatever. But we have our empty selected. It should highlight bright orange there for you. And we can hit Control H. And instead of doing hook to new object, we can do hook to selected object just like that. And now, if I grab this, it works, which is perfect. So now we have this perfectly set up to be able to move our bowstring around. So now we have to get it hooked to the actual bow. Our next tool is called a child of constraint. This works just like a simple parent-child relationship. The child inherits any of the transformation data from the parent. Except with a child of constraint, you can change its target, control its influence, and even constrain it to a single axis. This is so much better for rigging than a simple command P parent because it gives you that control. And that's especially true in our case while we're trying to parent an object to a specific bone. It's very simple and incredibly effective, so let's check it out. So we're going to go ahead and actually use the child of constraint to make sure that the top and bottom of our bowstring stick with the bow when it moves around. We won't be doing it to the middle, to the center controller here, but we'll touch on that later. So actually, before I do anything, I'm going to rename these. So this one is going to be string underscore 2, because that's going to be bottom. That's just how my brain works. And string underscore 1. So that will be the top here. So let's start with string underscore 1. So with our first controller selected up here, string underscore 1, let's go to the constraints tab. It'll look like a couple of gears going on there. And we can just add the child of constraint. It'll be here to the far right. So we actually have to have a target so that we can select something. And we're going to want to go ahead and go back up to our collection of the bow underscore prop and make sure that we turn back on bow underscore rig. That way we have an armature that we can actually parent the controller to. So if I click this little eyedropper, I can select our armature here, and under bone, I'm just going to go ahead and choose arm2 underscore L, which will be this bone up here. We can double check that by going into pose mode and clicking this bone, and sure enough, that's arm2 underscore L, so that's perfect. Now, when we did that, when we chose that bone as its parent, it shot off over here to the side, which is less than ideal. But we can go ahead and actually check the parenting, and sure enough, it is indeed parented. It is influenced by this top bone here, but it's not behaving in an expected way. So let's go ahead and fix this. Now, this problem is caused because it's trying to orient itself to the inherited transform values of that bone, and thus is being shut off as though it's always been parented to that object. So if we click set inverse, it will snap it right back to its original position. And if we go into pose mode here and move this around, we can see that it is still stuck to that bow perfectly. Now, adding a child of constraint is literally as easy as that. There's really not much more complexity to it. You have more controls here where you can change the influence of it. You can change the different axes here. You can retarget bones. You can add multiple child ofs and kind of cycle between them. But for the sake of simplicity in this tutorial, we're just going to keep it as simple as a parental type of a constraint. So now I'll show you how to copy constraints from one object to another. Now we will have to change a parameter still, so I guess it's not a perfect one-to-one, but if we select this controller down here and then shift click to select this one as the active object, we can go up to the arrow that's right next to the eyeball and copy to selected, just like that. Now if I click this, we see we have a child of constraint, and now I'll just change this from arm2L to arm2R, just like that. Now I'll set inverse and we can test it out. And it works splendidly. It is literally that easy. Now this process may seem like an overcomplication of a task as simple as parenting. But as scenes start to get more complex and relationships start to get more hazy, this constraint will be your best friend. Now, if you're having a good time and you're wanting to learn Blender in a more structured way, you need to check out Blender for 3D Artists, School of Motion's first Blender course. As your instructor, I'll take you through all the great tools that Blender has to offer, getting you ready to work with clients in no time at all. Blender's a growing force, and it does not seem to be getting any more expensive, so don't get left behind. So check out the link in the description and come learn Blender from a guy who, and I quote, teaches Blender pretty well. The next constraint is called follow path, and it is one of my personal favorites. Follow path is great for complex linear movements that would kind of be a pain to animate in multiple axes. Think bouncing balls, driving cars, or arrows vanquishing ducks. However, there is another application that I found for this constraint that is even more common in my workflow and less spoken about online, and that is simple linear movements in complex scenarios. So for example, if this bow were going all over the place, I risk gimbal lock with my controller if I were to try to animate it in a single axis. But by using the follow path constraint, I can pull it back smoothly along its designated path without ever touching a translation value. So let's go set it up. Okay, for the follow path constraint, we actually need to start by creating a path. So let's go ahead and hit Shift A, and we're going to add in a curve right here. And we can just choose Bezier. You can choose any of those, honestly, because we're going to tab into edit mode, hit A to make sure everything's selected, and X to delete all the vertices. And that's just because we want to draw it ourselves. We don't want to have to deal with wrangling all of those. So let's go ahead and hit T to open up our side panel here. And I'm going to choose the curve pen. And I'm just going to set 2 random points like that along the y-axis. We are probably going to have to change these at some point anyway, so it's not a big deal to just get it a little bit off. Now the first thing I'm going to do is take this top axis here, and I'm going to hold Shift S once again and choose Selection to Cursor. And that is literally just going to take my selection and nail it to the cursor. So that's perfect for what I need. And then I can select this one right here, and I can change the X value to 0. If you don't see that, that will be in to open your side panel and go all the way up to item. And now I'm just going to select all these vertices and scale them in the x-axis to 0. So I'll do S for scale, X to constrain in the x-axis, and 0 to make sure it's all zeroed out. So there we have ourselves a nice little path. And we're going to use this path or this curve to actually drive the movement of the bowstring controller. So as we constrain the controller to the path itself, it will stick to the path and will move with the path almost like a child of constraint or some kind of parental relationship. So because of that, we don't have to use child of constraint on the controller itself, but we should add a child of constraint to the path. So let's go ahead and do child of. I'll select our armature here and just choose the main bone. And we can test this out by going into pose mode and moving that around, and sure enough, the path moves with it. So now we need to make sure that we constrain this controller to the path itself. So we'll go up to Add Object Constraint, and we'll add our third constraint that we're going over today, Follow Path. So we're going to go ahead and use the eyedropper here, and we're just going to choose Bezier Curve. Now I'm going to go ahead and rename that just for the sake of keeping everything straight. I'm going to rename that to string_path. And you'll notice now my controller is all the way over here. That's obviously not where we want it to be, especially since we have 0 in the offset. And you can see here, we do have some transformations there, so I'm going to hit Alt-G just to reset that. And we can see that it has it all the way back here on the other side of our path. And set to 0, I want it to be in a resting position. I don't want to have to chase values all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and tab into edit mode, A to select all these, and just rotate this 180 degrees like that. And now you can see here, no matter where I move this, I can hit Alt-G and it will always return right back to its origin point. So now if I select my controller, I have an option to change the offset. So I can pull this value back to -100, and I can pull this all the way back here, and it will go in perpetuity as long as I don't have fixed position on, which will make sure that it only sticks to the path. But as long as that's off, I can make it go as far back as I want and really launch an arrow across the universe from that bowstring. And then of course I can always reset it to 0, and it's right back to its origin point just like that. Now the reason this works really good is because if I were trying to animate this in the Y value and then I was also moving the bow around, if I tried to then animate this going back and forth, it's very possible I could get into some sticky situations with various conflicts of rotation and all kinds of annoying things. So this keeps it really, really light and allows me to just have a single slider to change the value of the bowstring draw. So it's a really great and really useful thing for this, but it's also, as I said, really useful for stuff like, if you were launching an arrow and you wanted it to go into a perfect arc, so you don't have to animate all the way up and all the way down. It's really great for stuff like making a car drive on a path. And with that, when you're making the car drive on the path, you also have options to toggle on follow curve, so it will follow the actual rotation and not just the location. There's also curve radius option right here, which will actually allow you to change the radius of your curve. I can demonstrate this pretty easily. I can tab into edit mode here, and I'll just change the radius with Alt S like that. And if I toggle the curve radius on, you can see as I follow the curve there, it will grow in its size because it is oriented to the radius of the curve itself. So obviously it's great for stuff like that, like path animation, but I've found that it's also really helpful for just simple scenarios like this, where you might have an object or a more complicated rig that needs to move in a kind of a rotatey or an unpredictable way, but you still need to get a single axis move back and forth without any gimbal lock or any conflict of rotation. So that works great for that, and it is a super simple setup. And finally, the last constraint that we'll cover today is called damped track. If you've ever used constraints in Blender, specifically in camera animation, you may be familiar with the track to constraint. Track to is a great constraint as well, and it works really well and gives the user a lot of control and customability, especially with camera animation. However, for an operation as simple as aiming one object at another, it gets pretty finicky and needs a little bit of babysitting. And I think that's where damped track really picks up the slack. This constraint is great for quick and easy tracking setups. If you're tracking a camera, I think track is great and it typically works just fine. For pretty much everything else, I highly recommend damp track. So let's pop back into Blender and set up a damp track constraint to track our bow to an apple. All right, setting up our last constraint here, the damped track. We're gonna go ahead and turn on the apple prop. It should be right here. The collection is colored red for, of course, the color of an apple. And we just want to aim this bow directly at the apple. And it is such an easy setup. So we're gonna add a constraint to the bow armature itself. And we're just gonna do damp track right here. Now we can select the apple as the object. And it looks like nothing happened, but as soon as we start moving that apple around, we can see that the bow orients itself and aims itself right at the apple, which is really cool. It is as simple as that in this scenario because this is oriented to the y-axis. But let's say our bow was turned 90 degrees and it was actually in a different axis. At that point, you would have to shuffle some things around and change things. So let's, play that out so that you get an idea just in case you don't have the perfect scenario. So let's go ahead and rotate this bow 90 degrees, and I will hit Command A and apply the rotation. That way it's stuck in that orientation. Now we'll do the same thing. We'll add a damp track, and I will select this apple as the object. And if I move the apple around, we can see it does not aim at the apple. It aims kind of in the same orientation as the apple and kind of moves in relationship to the apple in a very clear way, but it is obviously not aimed at the apple the way that we want it. So that is as easy as just changing the track axis right here, which we're going to change it to Z because its up axis is Z. Well, so you might have to adjust what the actual tracking axis is, but even that in of itself is an absolute breeze. This is a super useful tool. Utilizing the power of constraints will give you full agency over your animations and remove some of the headaches that come with animating in a 3D space. I used all 4 of the constraints that we went over today in that short that you saw at the beginning, and it really greatly improves the quality of life while animating. Being that they can stack, they have varied influence, and they have so many neat little features, there is an endless amount of control that's given to you as an artist. Now, if you use any of these tricks to make your own cool work, or you use that bow to shoot something, be sure to post it on Instagram and tag me, sweetboy.motion. I love seeing your work. If you found this video useful, like it. Comment something about your own parent-child relationship, and subscribe. Find me on Instagram and Frame240. It's an awesome community over there. Both will be linked in the description. Thanks so much for watching.